So, guys, as someone interested in the development of the African continent, I've paid close attention to what is happening in all sectors. There's what we call the base, the base for development or the foundation for development in all societies, in all civilizations, in all countries that have been built, has been based on these particular sectors, okay? And society has been industrialized from there, from that point on. And of course, there has been rapid development, of course, which results from economic activities. Now, this school of thought buys the thinking that, or is based on the thinking that you invest in these base, sectors, which is infrastructure. It has to do with infrastructure, and then this infrastructure, of course, will give you, the base upon which to build an economy. Okay, so you build the base, which is the infrastructure, and then you build industries. Okay, and these industries, they are based on the infrastructure, and then you can get your economic growth and economic activity in all the country. And I buy this, and I saw this even with Nkrumah, but we have seen it even with China, that one of the most important things that China has done and even scared the West, they said in the Western world that China poured more concrete in the last 30 years than the United States poured in all its life of 200 years, all right, or 270 or 200 years, whatever it is. So what did this mean? This pouring of concrete basically means that they built infrastructure. Now, why am I, saying this? I'm saying this because there is an article which appeared in 2023, and it was a cause of concern to me. I was very concerned, not just about the people who wrote this particular article and their motive, what was driving them, but also their argument, which I found to be very stupid in itself. And I found to be sort of like they are driven by something that is sinister, which is, of course, true when it comes to Western thinkers. Most of them are, programmed, or they have programmed themselves to come up against Africa when it comes to development, because we all know that all development that is going to benefit the African continent, most of the times is going to impoverish them. Of course, at least that's how they see it. But it doesn't have to be this way, but this is how they see it. Now, let me share this article so that we can read out the most important parts together, which caught me and what these guys are saying. Of course, they are arguing against the building. They're arguing against the building of infrastructure as a driver of economic growth. And of course, in one part, they cited even one of the African economists called David Indi in Kenya. All right, there's David Indi in Kenya who argues that Africa should invest in agriculture, should not invest in infrastructure. Infrastructure-led growth, it doesn't make sense. So he was against this kind of approach. But of course, this guy has come out to be the chairperson of the economic advisor of the economic team of President Ruto. Okay, is the lead, is the chairman, and of course he has not been able to help even Kenya, unfortunately, of course. And of course he will argue that his policies or his advice was not followed. But why was it not followed? I think that has to be also questioned. Maybe your policies are not making a difference in society. So let me go to the article so that we can read this article and see what these guys are saying. So in the topic, in the heading, these guys say that grand infrastructure projects aren't a magic bullet for industrial development. Insights from Ghana and Kenya. This is what they argued. Now, the guys who wrote this article, one of them is called Seth Schneider, Seth Skindler, who's a senior lecturer in urban development and transformation at University of Manchester, and another one who's a lecturer in global urban development, University of Manchester, the same, who is Tom Gillespie. Whether it's Gillespie or Gillespie, nobody knows. So, but then also this appeared in one platform which is called The Conversation. This is a platform which is based in Australia. And I'm very skeptical of these platforms which are based in the West, because of our history, of course, with the West, and the fact that they are more preoccupied with exploitation of Africa, to their benefit, of course, and that's how they have been able to grow, whether it is labor and raw materials. Now, of course, they cited the African Union Agenda 2063 and the fact that it wants to link the African continent, with infrastructure, and infrastructure will in turn lead to industrialization, and industrialization will lead to development. Of course, that is what they said, which is most of the times, or the believers, for us who believe in this theory, is true for us. Now, they are saying that proponents of such an approach to development that focuses on infrastructure claim that improving connectivity will foster industrialization and planned urbanization. It gives policymakers tools to create well-planned urban regions that can compete in the global economy and attract foreign direct investment. These in turn will foster industrial growth. So, and then they came against it, of course. Of course, they stated one of the things which I've already said here, which they said that the argument goes that setting up development corridors and special economic zones, the argument. Okay, so let me go back here. Okay, so they are saying that the argument goes that setting up development corridors, special economic zones, new cities, and drawing up city master plans will lead to the development of urban spaces that can be plugged into the global production networks. This will boost the productivity and competitiveness of African industry. Ultimately, African countries will export more high-value manufactured goods rather than natural resources and unprocessed agricultural commodities. So now I'm differing from them in a way that for me, the way I look at infrastructure, I think that we of course we need to attract investment, high value investment in themselves, as they have mentioned. But I want infrastructure to be built by Africans, and I want Africans to be the drivers of their own economies, just like what Dangote mentioned recently. And he said that Africans are the ones who are going to build their continent. And of course, these guys, in their research, they claimed that they did research on Kenya and Ghana, and they saw that in infrastructure-led growth is not bringing about growth in the African continent. Now, while this may be true, these guys, some of the things which they forget is how their neocolonialism is controlling our continent. All right? How access to finance is controlling our continent, which they control themselves. And this is the problem for me, and how their grip on our raw materials and how their interference in our continent is controlling our continent. So they're saying that our research calls these claims into question. They are talking about our claim that infrastructure should lead the growth. So we assess the impact of transnational development corridor projects in Kenya and Ghana. We found that in both cases, improved connectivity failed to catalyze industrialization. Instead, it encouraged land speculation as it opened up new spaces for real estate investment. We concluded that, this is their conclusion, we concluded that infrastructure that links mines to ports isn't enough. It needs to be accompanied by policies that discourage speculation in land and encourage productive investment in factories that can process raw materials and provide jobs to the continent's young urban workforce. So this argument of theirs, of course, for me, I see it as half truth. They always have something to say which is right. When you say that, okay, development has not been able to happen on the African continent, that is true, right? Even though there has been some infrastructure which has been built. But let us also not forget that Africa is still has an infrastructure deficit of close to $200 billion annually. So the infrastructure itself which is being built is not enough. That is one thing. That is one point. Now, for you to unlock Africa's full potential, for Africa to compete for high value investment, for example, like chips, the automobile industry, you need certain aspects, which of course the African heads of state have tried to solve these problems. They have tried to solve them and attack them. But then the problem which we have on the African continent is that the heads of state themselves, even though they have implemented the policies or the particular infrastructures, one thing they have not understood is that it is insufficient for you to have these small infrastructure to some extent if you don't have access to the whole African continent. And that is where, of course, they came up with a solution of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. But even the Africa Continental Free Trade Area itself, since it is a continental infrastructure, it needs continental, it needs continent. Since it is a continental project, it needs continental infrastructure. All right, this is one thing that has to be understood clearly, and of course, which some of the African heads of state and themselves have not understood, that you need to put up continental infrastructure to unlock full potential and compete also on the international scale. You need to set up this infrastructure. But besides that, Africa has the money, but they don't know that they have the money. The African heads of state, they don't know that we have this money, and therefore the mobilization of this money is a problem. I'll give you an example. When you look at the remittances which Africa receives for 2023, the foreign direct investment from the West has gone down by 40%. It went down by 40% according to the Africa Development Bank, the data which came out recently. But when you look at the remittances, those remittances, they went up by 0.2%, even though it was marginal. Whatever went up was marginal, but nevertheless it went up. All the other figures which lead to bringing money into Africa or attracting money into Africa, any funds into Africa, went down. All the figures went down, but the remittances went. Now the remittances is one of the most important aspects that can be tapped if you talk about it or if you strategize very well. And of course, even the project which I'm working on, which is called the Africa Railway Triangle Network Master Plan, is based on remittances themselves. Now, what I mean by this is that we have the money, but the money is not being used very well. We have the other aspect of extraction of resources from the African continent, and President Magufuli showed us this, that if you block the illicit financial outflow from the African continent and the extraction of Africa's resources, you will create a pool of money which will be enough for you even to invest in your infrastructure and advance, of course, economic growth. Now, these are some of the things which you see that these scholars, so-called scholars from the West, they don't want to put this. They don't want to especially point out where imperialism is affecting the African continent and is holding the African continent back. When you look at data from the Africa Development Bank, actually they pointed out that the major culprit, who is impoverishing the African continent is not even just the Africa Development Bank, but also the United Nations pointed out when it brought out the report on illicit financial outflow from Africa, that Africa is losing up to $100 billion every single year, right? So the Africa Development Bank report, actually, which was published today, it showed that the extraction of value from the African continent compared to the money that is coming into the continent is the problem. That the continent, while it receives about 176 in inflows, what is being extracted from the African continent, according to the Africa Development Bank, is about 600. That's how much is flowing out. And the lead on that list is Western corporations, that are the ones which are misinvoicing, mining, specifically mining and all these oil companies and stuff like that. And of course the banking institutions, which are majorly West, they have captured all our financial institutions, the financial sector on the African continent. And of course they spoke about corruption, but the major culprit in all this was Western institutions at the lead, at the top, and they are taking from the continent more than $450 billion, and then corruption is taking somewhere around $170 billion. So you can see that the Western institutions and all the other institutions which are extracting value from the African continent, look, the banking alone, the value that we are paying, the loans that we are repaying, Africa is paying close to $75 billion every single year. So you can see that all these people, when they are talking about Africa's failure to industrialize, they are not talking about the fact that their industries are constantly running on Africa's raw materials, but they are always pinning. And this is the danger. This is the danger, which imperialism has, and neo-colonialism. And of course, these are part of that neo-colonial regime, these people who are commenting about Africa and claiming that Africa doesn't need infrastructure-led growth. Africa should change its position. All right, so it is very ridiculous. But then, what do you think yourself, about this approach and what these guys are talking about Africa? Which, of course, I don't believe that it is right. What they're saying is right, and we should follow it. We should definitely not follow it, and we need to answer back, of course, as Africans when we encounter such people, because they tend to want to shape the narrative on the African continent. They want to shape the conversation on the African continent, and we have seen this in numerous situations. And our people, even our very people, they go in and pick these researches, and because somebody is from the University of Manchester, Manchester this, Manchester, you're always from the London School of Economics. So even if this person is writing bullshit, our people sometimes they will pick it up and quote it and say this is the truth, this is the the real truth, this is the very truth, and therefore we should follow this. But of course, we as Africans, we constantly need to respond to such lies that may come up against our continent. Thank you so much. What do you think? Please comment in the comment section. What do you think about this particular situation? Put your suggestions in the comment section. The channel is called Africa Reimagined and Connect Africa. Please support us in any way which you can. Either way, thank you so much, and God bless you. I'll see you another time. God bless you.